komputer. Okay, I think kita boleh start lah sekarang, dah 8-5 minit kan. Kalau yang lambat tu nanti kita boleh suruh audience refer to the YouTube data. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to say thank you for everyone. Siapa yang dapat join our session today, thank you so much. So just some background. So sesi ini adalah sesi under Child Bilingualism Center. Oh, lupa nak beritahu nama I. Bajet orang kenal. Okay, nama saya Rabiatul Adawiyah. Saya pensyarah di Jabatan Bahasa Inggeris dan Kesusasteraan di bawah IKHS di UIA. Tapi kalau pergi fakulti IKHS tanya Dr. Rabia, orang tak kenal. Orang tahu Dr. Ruby. Jadi orang people know me as Dr. Ruby. So this session is under Child Bilingualism Center. What is that? Itu actually kita panggil pusat kajian untuk perkembangan bahasa kanak-kanak. Jadi sebelum ni kami ada banyak aktiviti webinar pasal perkembangan bahasa kanak-kanak. Cuma sekarang ni macam kita nak branch out, nak buat lain sikit lah. Maaf kalau terlalu. Okay, alright. So kita nak buat lain sikit. So itu sebab sesi ni adalah special edition. Still related to children lah. Sebab I rasa macam perlu lah. Kan? And then sebenarnya kenapa saya why do I organize this session? It's not because bukan sebab saya pensyarah ke sekolah ke, tak ada kena mengena. It's just I happen to have the center. It's more like I would say lebih kepada sebagai concern seorang ibu. And then the topic for today pun children, digitalization and pornography, ataupun kanak-kanak, digitalisasi and pornography and open kita nak buat perbincangan sebab time pandemic ni anak-anak kita memang sentiasa dengan device kan, and believe it or not kita nak deny pun tak boleh, macam that's the only way for them to entertain themselves. Yeah, so saya sebagai ibu macam agak risau dengan keadaan sekarang. Jadi because of that, saya telah menjemput dua orang very prominent speakers. Nombor satu Dr. Nazariah Janan. Okay, Dr. Nazariah is our child psychologist from Department of Psychology IUM. And kita ada Sister Nurliana Adlin. She's a child right advocate officer from Sohakam. Okay, so for today, just before we start, just nak beritahu how it goes lah. Okay, as you can see, saya nak cuba buat session ni macam as santai as possible. Okay, so you can use English, Malay English, it doesn't matter. You nak cakap Melayu, cakap English, you nak both. Kalau you nak guna bahasa lain pun boleh, tapi kena translate lah sebab I tak faham. Kalau you nak cakap Tamil ke Urdu ke Mandarin boleh, tapi kena translate dah balik kan. Alright, so I think without further delay, kita berkenalan dulu dengan kita punya speakers. So saya jemput Dr. Nazariah. Boleh tak Dr. Nazariah beritahu audience who are you and you know your expertise and all that. Dr. Nazariah, you are muted. Okay.
Alright, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum everyone. Okay, so thank you Ruby for what you call that, for inviting me to this santai online dialogue lah ya, kalau kita boleh kata. Okay, I was born in Sungai Besar, Selangor. So berasal dari Sungai Besar, Selangor. Sudah berumah tangga 22 tahun yang lalu dan mempunyai 5 orang cahaya mata. Alhamdulillah. So saya mula bekerja di UIA sebagai penolong pensyarah, ataupun dia dipanggil kat UIA dia panggil assistant lecturer lah pada tahun 1996. Kemudian immediately saya meneruskan pelajaran di bidang master, di peringkat master, dan kemudian balik UIA mengajar untuk several years, kemudian pergi sambung belajar, lepas tu balik, now become the senior lecturer lah dekat Department of Psychology. Okay, academic backgroundnya saya adalah alumni IIUM, dari department yang sama iaitu Department Psikologi dan kemudian sambung master di UIA juga dan kemudiannya melanjutkan pelajaran ke luar negara lah untuk PhD. So it is requirement lah waktu saya tu yang kalau 2 degree dah di dalam negara, so yang satu tu kena get exposure outside. I think the same goes to you, Ruby. Okay, experience saya mengajar developmental psychology, child psychology, adolescent psychology, the introduction to psychology since 2000 lah. Okay, bila saya habis master tu saya dah boleh mengajar di UIA dan semenjak tu saya mengajar developmental dan subjek di bawah developmental psychology. So by training I am developmental psychology. Happen to be my research mostly focusing on the children and adolescent. Okay, alhamdulillah diberi peluang untuk lead beberapa research grant berkaitan dengan kanak-kanak dan juga adolescent. So mungkin berdasarkan pengalaman mengajar saya dan kajian saya, kita boleh share sama-sama pada malam ni lah berkenaan dengan children digitalization and pornography from developmental perspective. So insya-Allah saya akan membawa pendengar semua dari perspektif developmental psychology. Okay, Ruby.
Okay.
I think that's all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nazaria. That is very, very, how do we compete with that? We can't. We don't compete. All right. All right. Next, Liana, tell us about you. You work, ground work that is more interesting. Tell us about you. Tell us about yourself, please.
All right. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening, everyone. My name is Liana, and I'm basically I also graduated from IIM, which is in 2018. Before that, sorry, I'm from Kuala Lumpur and I'm not yet married. So a bit of background about my educational background is that I took Bachelor of English Language and Literature 2014 to 2018, and then after I graduated, I continued my master. Before I continued my master, I was actually a part-time teacher for 2 years. And then I pursued my master in UKM, which is in the major of human security, which is another word for that is human rights. And right after I graduated from UKM, I worked with the Office of Children's Commissioner. It's basically part under the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, or SUHAKAM for short. And my work basically revolve around children, whereby I take complaints and also do monitoring works related to children who are detained in like prisons, if we have heard of Sekolah Henry Gani, and also Rumah-Rumah JKM. And aside of that, when investigating complaints is basically receive complaints, either by parents, by children themselves, or by teachers, and then investigate that in the perspective of child rights. So basically my work revolves around on the view of advocating for children's rights to be protected. So that is basically the thing that we discuss for today.
Okay. Yes, sangat-sangat menarik. Okay, jadi kita start session. Alright. Jadi sebab the way how it goes, nanti saya akan tanya soalan pada Dr. Nazar dengan Liana. Audience boleh tanya soalan tapi maybe tunggu at the end of the session. Kalau tak nanti sampai pukul 1 pagi. Dia macam kan, sampai pukul 1 pagi tak habis-habis sebab topik menarik kan. Okay, kita start dengan Dr. Nazar lah. Dr. Nazar, from your because from the psychological perspective, as a psychologist, boleh tak you macam terangkan pada kami semua apa yang kita maksudkan tentang bila kita cakap kanak-kanak ni, siapa yang kita refer kanak-kanak tu, at umur berapa kanak-kanak, dan also you being a developmental psychologist, maybe you boleh beritahu kita orang tentang perkembangan kanak-kanak tu sendiri. Sekejap, you nak share screen ke?
Boleh saya share tak?
Lupa pula nak ni, advanced hearing option, all participants are bukan share. Okay,
so Okey, nampak tak Ruby?
Nampak.
Okey. Alright. Okey. Kanak-kanak ni biasanya kita refer seawal apabila mereka lahir ke dunia ini sehinggalah ke usia 12 tahun. So maksudnya di sini, okey, kalau kita lihat itulah peringkat umur kanak-kanak, tetapi dalam lingkungan daripada lahir 0 ke 12 tahun tu dia terbahagi kepada peringkat-peringkat yang lebih kecil, iaitu peringkat infansi, peringkat bayi, okey, kemudian peringkat early childhood ataupun preschool, kemudian peringkat middle childhood, iaitu peringkat tahap 1 lah kalau dekat sekolah kebangsaan. Kemudiannya peringkat yang terakhir kanak-kanak adalah adalah digelar late childhood, iaitu peringkat tahap 2 lah, daripada darjah 4, tahun 4 sampai ke tahun 6. So basically itulah peringkat yang digelar kanak-kanak. Okay. Tetapi kajian yang menunjukkan ke arah pornografi mendapati bahawa umur yang terlibat adalah 5 ke 17 tahun, iaitu termasuk remaja. Okay. So dalam perbincangan kita pada malam ni, so perkembangan kanak-kanak yang saya akan ceritakan adalah juga berkaitan dengan perkembangan apabila remaja itu memasuki usia alam remaja. Sebab perkembangan ni dia tidak berakhir apabila kita berhenti dalam satu-satu peringkat. So maksudnya apa perkembangan yang berlaku waktu infansi, waktu bayi, ada kesannya kepada perkembangan seterusnya pada peringkat early childhood, middle childhood as well as the remaja. Okay, sebab tu dia ada kaitan antara satu sama lain. Dan perkembangan ini juga dia bukannya macam independent from one aspect to another. So kita tak boleh kata kognitif ni dia berkembang independent from social aspect, independent from the personality aspect. Tak ada. Perkembangan ni dia adalah two ways. So maksudnya kognitif dia memberi kesan kepada sosial. Sosial memberi kesan kepada personality. Dalam kata lainnya, dia berkaitan antara satu sama lain dan dianya continue daripada satu peringkat umur kepada peringkat umur yang lain. Baik. Okey, di sini, okey, kalau lihat pada struktur yang saya paparkan di sini, kita boleh lihat bahawa this is the developmental process ataupun developmental outcome yang later on ada kait mengaitnya dengan keupayaan children for digitalization and also pornography. Okay, kita ikut arah jam. Yang pertamanya adalah thinking and perception. Okay, kanak-kanak sebenarnya seawal peringkat bayi, thinking and perception mula mengambil tempat. Kadang-kadang ibu bapa bila dia nampak bayi je, dia macam oh cute-nya, comelnya kan. So mereka terlepas pandang bahawa the thinking and perception has started. But okay, the level of the thinking and perception is different from the age of the early childhood, middle childhood and adolescent. So the thinking and perception is more on the aspect that stimulate the sense organ. Kan? So kalau Ruby nyanyi pada anak, malam-malam nyanyi lagu, ada satu lagu yang you cipta khas, kan? You nyanyi pada anak. So anak tu dia akan simpan memori tu. Walaupun bayi ni dia punya memori wujud, tapi length of duration of the memory is actually very short. Kan? Tapi kalau Ruby buat hari-hari, okay, so as they grow older, the duration of the memory will become longer. So bila dia dah umur 2 tahun, it become more permanent lah dalam memori kita. Kan? So itulah kenapa bayi boleh kenal, boleh identify suara mak dia. Sebab mak dia cakap hari-hari dengan dia. Cuba mak dia hanya bela dalam 1 minggu, kemudian disappear. For certain reason lah, mungkin dia wujud kat rumah tapi sibuk, tak ada peluang bercakap dengan anak. So the thinking about whose voice is that, okay, is not going to be developed. Kan? So di sinilah thinking ni sebenarnya ada kait mengait dengan later on of what the children and the adolescent will choose for their preference in using the social media. Okay, contohnya bila dia melihat bahawa abang di rumah, kakak di rumah, ibu bapa melihat benda-benda yang kurang baik. Okay, melihat aurat orang lain dalam movie contohnya. So perkara tu akan membina satu persepsi dalam kanak-kanak, it is something that is acceptable. Kan, so dia akan bina macam tu. So it's very important for us, that is to expose the children to a good kind of events, good kind of item, images, whatever, so that they will build the correct norms, the correct schema about what is important in their life. Kalau kita dah ruin that kind of process of thinking, nanti dia susah sikit lah kita nak reverse the process. Because as they become older, the thinking and perception become more stable in the cognitive of the children. Okay, that is about thinking and perception. Okay, about identity and role confusion. Okay. Kita rata-ratanya selalu mengatakan bahawa remaja ni ada kecelaruan identiti. Kan, masalahnya kenapa ya remaja ni ialah ada masalah kecelaruan identiti. Tapi sebenarnya apa yang menyebabkan remaja tu mempunyai kecelaruan identiti is because of the process before the adolescent become teenagers lah. So maksudnya di sini apabila mereka berada di dalam peringkat membina identiti, mereka sepatutnya bisa untuk membuat keputusan yang efektif. Nak membuat keputusan yang efektif ni, remaja perlulah mempunyai satu perception, satu perasaan, satu rasa yakin bahawa mereka boleh membuat sesuatu yang berguna dalam hidup ni. Kalau sebelum ni, waktu kanak-kanak, bila dia membuat sesuatu selalu diperlekehkan. Apa ni? Tak cukup baiklah apa yang awak buat ni. Awak sepatutnya dapat grade 100%, bukannya dapat 70. Kan? So that such kind of blame will create the feeling in the children that I'm not capable to make decision. So bila kanak-kanak ada perasaan tu, bila dia meningkat remaja, dia akan sukar untuk membuat keputusan yang efektif untuk diri dia. So this is where bila dia dipengaruhi oleh kawan, okay, so kawan akan kata, tengoklah filem ni, tengoklah gambar yang tak baik ni. So dia akan macam, patutkah aku tengok? Tak patutkah aku tengok? Kan? So dia macam, what should I do? Tapi kalau dia dah dibentuk daripada peringkat awal untuk sentiasa membuat keputusan yang efektif, dia akan kata, no, I'm not going to see that movie. That is wrong because bla 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 bla. Kan? Alright. Dan kemudiannya kita pergi pada personality. Okay, kalau time's up, kita tahu ya Ruby. Okay, personality di sini adalah satu proses di mana kanak-kanak mula membina personality daripada peringkat umur 7 tahun. Okay. Peringkat sekolah rendah lah sebenarnya kan. So peringkat 7 tahun dia akan membina personality, dan sebahagian daripada teori psikologi mengatakan by the age of 12 years old the personality is already stable. So kalau kamu adalah seorang insan, seorang kanak-kanak yang diajar tentang moral, okay, yang diajar tentang right and wrong behavior correctly, and you have internalized that understanding, you are able to become a person who has the very high conscientiousness. Kan? So walaupun yang datang tu apa pun dugaannya, gambar lucah ke, video lucah ke, dia akan very strong to say that I'm not going to watch that. Okay? Tetapi kalau conscientiousness tu, internalization of the moral reasoning, moral feeling is not there to be developed because of certain reason, okay? Because of the parenting style, because of the lack of the coaching process of making decision, of the moral development is missing. So the personality, the individual develop is more likely towards the individual who does not know about what is right and wrong. Itu bahayanya, ya. Okay. Alright, so we go to the moral development. As I said, moral development begin very early. Okay, it begin with what the children observe from the role model. Kan? Kalau role model ni jenis yang jenis suka marah pemandu di depan contohnya. Kalau pemandu di depan tu lambat tu popek marah dalam kereta. So children will learn that. Okay, so the moral feeling is going to be developed in a very bad condition. So means that orang buat salah sikit marah, orang buat salah sikit marah. So that is a kind of feeling that you have. But if you are being trained, okay, being nurtured with the correct moral feeling, correct moral reasoning, so insyaAllah, the moral behavior will be seen in the children when they grow up as the adolescent. And the other one, the one in the blue, is self-concept. Okay, self-concept adalah satu proses di mana kanak-kanak membina siapa diri dia. Who am I? What I am capable for? Am I useful? Am I being recognized? Okay, what should I do? So semua tu terbina seawal usia 2 tahun. Okay, so tapi as I said, okay, 2 tahun ni dia lebih kepada bentuk fizikal. Okay, so bila itu pasal kalau budak-budak 2 tahun ke 4 tahun, kalau kita puji dia, comelnya, cantiknya, you are princess, kan? So dia akan rasa seronok sebab that is the physical aspect that will make them feel who they are. Okay, but as they enter to 5 years old, dia dah bertukar dah. Dia bukan physical aspect, but how do you recognize their willingness to contribute, their willingness to initiate something. Kadang-kadang budak-budak ni dia suka tolong mak dekat dapur, kan. Kadang-kadang rimas, mak pun rimas, alah, hai, kan. So kita kata, pergi depan, kan. So that is actually will contribute something that is not good in the self-concept of the children. Dia banyak lagi lah example, kan. Kadang-kadang kalau budak offer, kita kena ambil lah offer tu walaupun kita takut nanti pecah lah telur 1 dozen yang kita beli, kan. Allahu Akbar, macam tu. Tapi yalah, ini peringatan untuk diri saya juga, kan. Kadang-kadang tak apalah biarlah mama bawakan. But you know, the offer that they give is actually need to be answered lah. Kan, mungkin you akan kata, meh kita carry sama-sama, kan. Kalau nak terjatuh tu cepat-cepat kita pegang macam tu, kan. So that is how they develop this self concept tu. Perkara ni akan berlaku, ada kaitannya dengan apa tu orang kata mental health of the children in the future. Some of the budak, kan, dia lahir dengan pembawaan yang digelar difficult children. Okay, difficult children ni dia anxious dengan new event, novel things. Okay, so kalau misalnya feedback daripada kemalangan yang timbul because of the new event, new initiative yang dia buat, dia akan rasa anxious, fear to try a new one. Kan? So this is where kanak-kanak ni dia adalah anugerah Tuhan yang mana macam manusia yang lain, dia ada perasaan nak membina new things. Kan? Tapi dia tahu kalau dia buat new thing mestilah kena condemn punya dengan mak bapak, kan. Mestilah kena condemn punya dengan kakak dan abang. So where they are going to find the recognition, to find that yes, you are do great thing, is from the friend. from the peers. Beruntunglah kalau kita dapat peers yang suruh membuat benda-benda yang baik kan. Sebab tu dia dapat recognition. Tapi kalau friend kata, oi cubalah benda yang tak elok kan. So to being accepted is a natural things in individual. Kita pun kan kadang-kadang kalau kawan kata belilah tudung ni, sekarang orang pesen pakai tudung ni, kita pun naklah kan, get along. That is also children, but in different aspect lah, how people want to get something lah kan from recognition of other people. Okay, the last one, biopsychosocial. Okay, children ni bila Allah Subhanahu Ta'ala jadikan kita the engineering of Allah Subhanahu Ta'ala dalam tubuh badan manusia ni amatlah awesome. Kan tak ada siapa yang boleh buat sebagaimana Allah Subhanahu Ta'ala jadikan diri kita. Okey. Macam mana? Dalam tubuh badan kita ni ada hormon kan? So hormon tu waktu dia kanak-kanak, hormon yang meningkat, hormon yang aktif adalah hormon yang boleh membantu life of the children. Okey. So maksudnya hormon yang mengawal lapar dan kenyang anak. Okay. So as children grow older, another hormone that become greater in the body because of the need of that hormone to function to different tasks that Allah has already designed for us. Okay. Okay. Now, bila anak-anak tu dah masuk usia tahap 2 di sekolah rendah, iaitu darjah 4, darjah 4 10 tahun perkembangan towards akhir balik dah mula kan. So kalau kita tengok tadi kanak-kanak perempuan tu sudah menunjukkan struktur tubuh yang lain lah, mak tentu tahu kan. So itu menunjukkan bahawa hormon tu dah mula ke arah puberty. Okay, so di situlah kalau kita boleh terangkan kepada kanak-kanak yang sudah hampir akhir balik ni berkenaan dengan bagaimana hormon boleh mempengaruhi pemikiran kita, bagaimana boleh mempengaruhi tingkah laku kita kan. Kalau kita tengok kanak-kanak ni dia dah mula cenderung suka drama-drama cinta kan. Kalau yalah macam-macam lah kan. Lepas tu share pula dengan kawan kan. So itulah yang menyebabkan berlakunya pertukaran dalam tingkah laku, pemikiran kanak-kanak berkenaan dengan seks. Alright. Di sini, kalau kita tak kawal, kalau kita tak jelaskan, what happen is that I'm afraid the hormone yang related dengan sexual desire tu is likely to be higher sebelum waktunya. Sebelum mindanya, kognitifnya layak dan boleh membuat keputusan di frontal lobe-nya, rational thinking tu dapat dicapai, dia dah mula ada perasaan seks yang tinggi. Itu bahayalah kan. So maksudnya kita kena kawal lah anak kita, kita kena terangkan macam mana hormon, apa itu organ seks, bagaimana seksual ni boleh mempengaruhi diri individual. Kita kena cakap dengan anak-anak kita. Okay, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Nazar. I think your explanation too rocks. Memang clear. And if I have to say something as a parent, sebagai ibu, I think communication tu dengan anak sangat penting. One thing lah as sebagai ibu, one thing I learn, kalau you menghalang dan you tak bagi tahu kenapa, dia lagi menyebabkan benda tu budak lagi curious tau. Kalau you nak halang, you kena beritahu kenapa tak boleh.
Reason.
Komunikasi itu sangat penting.
Betul.
Sebab how to say, by prohibiting something sebenarnya you empower the kuasa tu tau. So sebenarnya the way is open communication. So thank you so much Dr. Nazra. I will come back to you.
Kejap saya lupa, minta maaf lah. Kalau kita tengok pada gambar baby ni, kita akan kata macam kita akan nampak saya nak bagi keselamatan diri dia, itu body. Saya tak nak anak ni cedera. Dan saya nak bagi susu yang sihat, susu ibu, sebab susu ibu boleh membina sel otak dengan baik. Itu adalah brain dia. So kita fokus kepada mind, kita fokus kepada body. Tapi dia ada satu lagi element of human nature, that is soul. Kan? So soul ni dia wujud dah daripada kecil. Okay? Cuma waktu kecil dia punya keadaan dinamiknya soul tu kecil lah. Okay. Tapi bila semakin besar, semakin dewasa, the soul become very influential dalam kehidupan individu. So kalau kita tengok apa yang saya cakap berkenaan dengan perkembangan kanak-kanak ni, dia semua cakap pasal mind or body. Tapi kita sebagai orang Islam, kita kena percaya human nature dalam diri anak-anak, okay, dalam diri kita juga ada satu elemen lain, that is soul. And this soul is very powerful. It can influence the mind, it can influence the body. This is what we need to do. Even though the children is very young here, but we need to nurture the soul also. Kita kena bagi makanan soul. Macam mana nak suruh kanak-kanak ni berzikir? Kan? Sebab makanan soul ni salah satu dia adalah zikir di samping ibadat lain. So memanglah susah kan? Tapi kita sebagai ibu bapa kena bagi perasaan selamat, aman, nyaman kepada anak. So this is where the soul will not be very sick. Kan, alright, itu je lah, nanti kita sambung lagi.
Okay. Kita akan sambung balik ke Dr. Nazar. Sekarang kita will move to Liana. So Liana, because as I said, you work on the ground level, you actually deal with directly with cases involving children, right? So can you share with us? Sorry, Kak Nazar nak. So
itulah stop.
Sorry. Okay. Alright. Can you share, Liana? Can you share with us your perspective about this issue?
Okay, boleh. Cuma saya start share screen.
Okay.
Alright. Okay, nampak ke?
Nampak.
Alright, okay. So just to start things off, kita akan start dengan the reality of what is on the ground lah. So basically just what I mentioned earlier, I'm working with the Office of the Children's Commissioner, basically under the Division of Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, and there are three basically units divided: advocacy, promotion and awareness, and investigation and monitoring of child rights, basically, which is under my job scope. So okay, before we go into the reality of what happens, these are the 4 core principles of which is imbued in the Convention on the Child Rights, which is hak mengenai Convention berkenaan hak kanak-kanak. So these are the 4 core, or basically the 4 tunjang utama yang rule hak kanak-kanak. So basically the first one is best interest of the child, which is kepentingan terbaik kanak-kanak, and this is given the example of apa benda yang kita buat as an adult, as a parent, as a teacher, we must consider the best interest of the child, meaning that kita mesti utamakan kepentingan yang terbaik kanak-kanak tu, sama ada kanak-kanak ni dapat rehat secukupnya atau dapat makanan secukupnya. That is the main consideration. So the second one is non-discrimination. Basically tiada diskriminasi di mana semua kanak-kanak adalah sama. And then this is not only limited to, kalau discrimination kita biasanya macam very familiar with religion, race, different backgrounds and what forth. But for children, they have a lot more not critical but more critical issues, which is by in our current setting also ada discrimination towards yang warga negara dan bukan warga negara, contohnya macam hak kepada pendidikan. So that also cover under the non-discrimination. And the third one is the right to life, survival and development. Basically macam kanak-kanak perlu mendapatkan makanan secukupnya, tempat tidur yang elok. And then the last one is child's participation, meaning that in everything we do, we must always put the children's voice or having children's representation as part of our work. So basically, just a big brief on this particular right is that for our office, we do have like several, I think 20 children, around 20 children who we actually always consult in order, bila kita buat program or bila kita buat some sort of webinar, kita akan invite children lah. Okay, that's on that. So basically on the reality of what the issue is about today, saya akan start dengan the terms first. So I think think people already quite familiar now with child grooming than it used before. Sebelum ni rasanya macam tak berapa familiar with the terms of child grooming. So what is child grooming? Basically, it's befriending and establishing an emotional connection with the child, meaning that having an adult establish some sort of connection with the child emotionally, and sometimes also dengan family kanak-kanak tu sendiri to lower the child's inhibitions with the objectives of sexual abuse. Maksudnya kanak-kanak ni bila dia dah digroom, diorang tak akan realise when that is a form of abuse. So dalam bahasa Melayu dia, child grooming kita panggil pengantunan kanak-kanak, and dia sejenis aktiviti jenayah kadang-kadang melalui internet menjadikan kanak-kanak sebagai rakan dengan tujuan basically untuk menjadikan kanak-kanak sebagai sahabat, sebagai rakan, dan memujuk mereka untuk menjalinkan hubungan seksual. And then another word here I'll fokus adalah amang ataupun keganasan. Amang seksual sama je maksud dengan keganasan seksual, tapi kalau dalam bahasa kalau kita buat research or educational studies, we usually use amang seksual instead of keganasan seksual. So okay, that is on the term. So the reality of what's on the ground now, this is based on the UNICEF Our Lives Online report, which published just last year, August 2020. It is mentioned that 1 in 3 internet users is a child, meaning that if you have a household of like 6 children, probably half of the household are children, they use internet. And then the same study also mentioned that 175,000 children go online for the first time every day. Maksudnya every single day kita akan ada ramai lagi kanak-kanak yang access kepada internet, which is a lot. Okay. Alright. So the next one is that the same study, the study actually surveyed respondents from 4 ASEAN countries, and ASEAN countries, I think Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines, if I'm not mistaken. And then from those respondents, 127 are from Malaysia, and they revealed that the top online activity for children are through text communication, and this can be like WhatsApp or WeChat, social networking macam Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, online research, we have Google, Yahoo, and also watching videos macam YouTube. So, and 92% of these children aged 5 to 7 years old are basically used internet through these 4 main mediums. And then 91.8% of these children access the internet from a smartphone. Meaning that kanak-kanak sekarang memang access internet memang guna smartphone lah for most of them. And that according to Cyber Security Malaysia is under the government. And they also made a research saying that in 2017, 92% of students aged 13 to 17 had social media accounts. Sorry, there is no had here. Basically have social media accounts. This is in 2017. Okay, the data, which is having 92% is a lot. And then kita ada the current reality now with MCO and whatnot, with more children staying inside. Of course, the numbers is increasing. And then, okay, just now is on the usage of internet. Now is on the survey of the usage of internet during the MCO itself, which is a very, very recent survey done by an NGO called the Childline Foundation. It is a survey filled by 525 children aged 8 to 17 years old, with 91 respondents coming from B40 background. And then 2 in 5, according to this survey, 2 in 5 children shared that they had bad experience using the internet. Basically, it's like hampir separuh daripada kanak-kanak yang menggunakan internet ni memang experience bad experience, and half of them has seen or received sexual materials. And sexual materials here basically can be images, videos, some sort of all any other materials that you can imagine of. Half of them seen it, and 22% said that they were asked to do sexual acts, and 17% were asked to share private body parts. And that is a very scary figure. Of course, it's very scary, and we know that like half of them is like 200 plus of these children, and this is only done by like 500 children. All right. And then this is on the data that we received from Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, MCMC, saying that in 2018, they have banned 17,323 IP addresses that involve with child pornography that came from Malaysia alone. And then these IP addresses made Malaysia as the top consumer of online child pornography in Southeast Asia. And then the victims were mostly around age 13 to 16. And this is online child pornography here does not limit to consuming, but also producing the child pornography materials. All right, so okay, this is basically shared by MCMC, and these are the most recent one. And they mentioned that eksploitasi kanak-kanak berapa banyak account yang mereka dah block. Macam Facebook sahaja dah 35.9 million accounts have been blocked in 2020 alone. Instagram 3.29 million. The numbers are a lot here. So basically these are the very, very worrisome and scary numbers. And even YouTube also 11.5 million has been deleted. So these are among all the works that they have done, which is I'll just go through briefly here. And these are the 4 acts when it comes to like mendakwa masalah yang groom kanak-kanak. So okay, this is from PDRM, and PDRM also reported that Malaysia has closed up to 20,000 IP addresses that download and also upload visuals of child pornography materials. And from PDRM punya data, there are top 3 applications in Malaysia whereby children access pornography, which WhatsApp, Instagram, and also WeChat, which are also quite familiar with us adults. And then jenayah kanak-kanak yang kita dapat lihat kat sini, jumlah dia untuk 2018 hingga ke pertengahan 2020 around 776 kesalahan. And then kalau kita tengokkan dia punya pecahan kat sini, pornografi melibatkan kanak-kanak, pengantunan kanak-kanak, basically child grooming, akta kesalahan seksual terhadap kanak, which is any kind of crimes that involve this kind of sexual abuse or sexual allegation. Okay, this is the most scary part because Rogol here 523 kes, di mana 523 kes ni melibatkan kes Rogol yang bermula dengan media sosial dan internet. Alright, and also Rogol berkumpulan. 152. And then next, this is until 2020, but then this is the latest for 2021 alone, daripada bulan Januari hingga mid-June hari tu, jumlah terhadap kanak-kanak, but please note that this is not only, this is not for media sosial and internet alone, this is the overall jumlah jenayah terhadap kanak-kanak. Kita tengok memang meningkat lah, but then surprisingly for 2019 and 2020, it's menurun. Tapi from our view, it doesn't reflect what happened during MCO. Sebab during MCO, this is just like another background story lah. During MCO, kebanyakan kanak-kanak dia stay kat rumah. So reports are not being made in a way that these children cannot make reports. So that is what we believe happened. But of course, it's just an assumption lah. But then if we look at in 2021 alone, separuh tahun saja kita, kalau kita darab 2 pun dah dah meningkat around 1,000. So this is like the picture of what we can see lah. And then alright, this is for parents. I've shared some of the top application used and can be very dangerous to children, like the top 3 mentioned here just now: WhatsApp, Instagram, and WeChat, and also other kind of applications that parents should know. So I just share it here. And then, okay, signs to look for. This is basically for predators lah. This is kalau kita identify that how children are being the victims of child pornography. So these are the signs to look for. It can be very much more, tapi yang saya dapat lah. And the first one is changes of attitude in the use of technology. Maksudnya dia guna teknologi tu tiba-tiba nak guna waktu malam, ataupun tiba-tiba macam mak ayah tak payah tengok sekali. And then the sudden need for privacy, like mentioned just now, kadang-kadang bila dia buka gadget tu, tiba-tiba dia tukar tab, atau tiba-tiba dia tukar app lain, atau tiba-tiba dia home. That is like the very common behavior. And then the third one is behavioral or sleeping disorders. Fourth, poor academic performance also is one of the signs. Social isolation or changes in social habits, maksudnya tiba-tiba mengurung dalam bilik or not really active as much as previously. And then last one is emotionally low, sad, or crying, which is these are the major signs that you can look for when to identify whether the children is a victim. And then, okay, predators alert. These are some of the things that the signs for predators, which is pemangsa. And then actually there's no really one specific sign that we can identify the predators, but the predator is really like anyone else, like everybody else around us. They blend into the society. They typically clean-cut, outwardly law-abiding, they pakai kemas, and sadly, mostly male, middle age. They use their position in the society to show off suspicion. Usually someone yang very ada position lah in society, and can rise to be a pillar of society. Usually approach children and often engage in activities involving children, and appears trustworthy to both parents and child, and someone seems very trustworthy. And I can give an example of this. Kebanyakan kes yang saya sendiri dapat, saya sendiri siasat, although it's not just solely related to digital or internet, social media, but when it comes to sexual abuse cases, the predators, I think 90% of what I've received, the predators are always the person that is the closest and the most trusted by the children. For example, kalau kat sekolah, cikgu. Kalau kat pusat tahfiz, ustaz. These are the very two common yet gruesome reality that I can pinpoint. So, right.
Sorry, Liana, I just want to know, what about, because you mentioned school setting kan, kalau rumah?
Okay, kalau rumah, kita ada juga case yang dapat on sexual abuse ni, which is the father of the child, of the daughter. It's, I'm not sure if I can share it explicitly here, but it was only known by the mother, I think, after the child turns 4 ke 5, tapi the activity started since baby lagi. Maksudnya, okay, I'm sorry if this offended everyone. Maksudnya, bila bapa tu, one of the thing yang dia share lah, bila bapa tu mandikan the child, dia akan masukkan. That is also considered sexual abuse.
And the mother tak perasan?
Yes, the mother tak perasan. Only after like the child turns 4 to 5, because sadly the child masturbate. That is how the mother actually know that this is not right. So they make a report and also the investigation going on. So it's a very long, lengthy case lah. But yeah, alhamdulillah dah didakwa lah. So okay, that is the example I can share. Okay, so seek help. This is basically related to if you identify someone or a child yang experience this kind of disturbance or sexual online disturbance, you can make a report to the nearest police station, or you can contact Thailand Noor 15999. This is under the Kementerian Wanita. And also these 3 NGOs which are very proactive in helping both women and children. But for Body Bag, they only memang focus on children, and I think they only launched it last MCO 2.0. So yeah, you can actually take these numbers and contact them if they need help, advices. So I think, okay, this is shared by my friend in UNICEF. They has just launched, for parents now, they has just launched some sort of chat box whereby children around age of 15, even until up to 24, you can ask any questions related to sexual health reproductive. Basically, you can ask about puberty, you can ask about macam mana nak bersihkan pad, macam mana nak, you know, what happens when I experience some sort of datang bulan, or kalau for lelaki, macam wet dream. You can ask everything in this one, but then it's very safe, because it is monitored by those by counselors and also those experts lah yang akan pantau and also chat with these children. So okay, I think that is all from my part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lana. Yes, sangat enlightening to the point of being scary. But that's the reality, kan? That's the reality that we should know about. So I think now we can go back to Kak Naza, Dr. Naza, and then I'll go back to Yana juga. Just for children, bila dorang view pornographic material, bila dorang tengok porn, kan, ataupun macam yang Yana dah share, dorang sendiri jadi bahan, kiranya dorang sendiri jadi bahan, kan, there must be effects, kan? They must be effects. So I think maybe Dr. Naza can tell us what are the effects, either assessing or paling teruk jadi bahan terus lah.
Alright, kita boleh tengok dia punya kesan daripada menjadi mangsa seks ni kepada kanak-kanak daripada kita boleh tengok daripada sudut biopsychosocial, di mana perasaan membenci diri itu akan berlakulah. Okay, so maksudnya di sini contohnya lah kalau berlakulah hubungan seks tadi dan kemudiannya remaja perempuan itu mengandung anak luar nikah, maka dia akan menyebabkan perubahan pada diri kanak-kanak itu, dan unfortunately sometimes it happen before the correct age. Kan? So dalam kajian developmental psychology always menitik beratkan di mana early pregnancy, waktu teenagers ni dia ada kesan yang tidak bagus kepada anak yang dikandung as well as kepada ibu yang mengandung. Kan? So maksudnya kepada ibu yang mengandung ni dari segi biopsychosocialnya adalah tubuh badan tu sendiri dah kuat ke belum. Kan? Cuba bayangkan kalau 13 tahun, 14 tahun, is the body is ready to become pregnant. Kan? So kemudian komplikasi ke tak waktu melahirkan anak tu. So badan tu belum matured enough lah. Okay? Itu yang pertamanya. Yang keduanya, apabila badan tidak sihat, okay, belum healthy, okay, so di sini anak yang dilahirkan juga akan tidak sihat. Kan? So bila anak tu tidak sihat, macam mana saya katakan tadi, dia ada connection nanti dengan cognitive development, dengan psychosocial development, di mana anak yang tak sihat ni ataupun nanti kalau anak tu menjadi disable, kan, so bagaimana perkembangan yang seterusnya. Kan? So di situlah kesannya. So apabila ibu ni tadi trauma, dia mengalami mental problem, what happened is that the sensitive interaction for the baby during the first 2 years to build the secure attachment is likely not to happen. So dia akan ada menjadi rentetan lah nanti.
Vicious cycle lah.
Kan?
Vicious
So,
cycle.
yes. Bila kanak-kanak ni tak dapat secure attachment, dia akan teruk lah nanti. Dia punya social, dia akan ada masalah. So this is where the implication from developmental perspective lah would happen. Kan?
Actually, when you say, Dr. Naza, when you say developmental is one thing, but also societal. So you imagine kalau orang ramai jadi tu, what would happen to the society?
Sebab tu dalam Islam memang mencegah lah, kan.
Imagine kalau
berzina, dia kata bukan jangan berzina, tapi jangan menghampiri zina. Sebab kesannya amat mendalam lah. Sebab kalau kita tengok anak luar nikah ni pun tidak boleh didaftarkan di atas nama bapanya. Dia ada kod tu. So orang akan tahu macam kod dia tu, okey, dia orang
sekarang
tahu.
dah 99 nama Allah tu orang letak. So before this Abdullah je, kan?
Kan?
Tapi dah ada stigma, so orang letak boleh tak Berrahman Abdul segala 99 tu boleh just to yelah, it's not the child's fault pun, kan?
Kan? So nanti waktu dia umur 4-5 tahun mungkinlah dia tak faham, kan, tapi
masuk
bila
sekolah.
dia dah masuk sekolah, nanti masyarakat kita ni kadang-kadang macam terkeluar jugalah kan. So bagaimana perasaan dia, akan rasa macam I am very bad. Kan. So biasanya dia punya stimulation at home pun is not positive, the environment. So it's very hard to build a very what you call that strong personality, strong positive personality that we say is not my mistake, dan bukan salah saya. So you are less likely capable to say that because of our culture that will menyalahkan dia kan. So itu adalah antara psychological impact lah of this problem.
Issue ya. Yana, so because you see these children who are yang directly kan, can you macam tell us what are some of the common effects you see among all these children? I mean, what is,
So I think yang first one is when I interview the child, the very first apparent effect is the trauma lah, because you know what the child had experienced, and biasanya sebab these children bila kita interview, they know that something is wrong. They know that perhaps the mother or the father dah bagi tahu, okay, sexual you involved in this kind of thing is not right. Tapi mereka tak tahu yang they are the victims. They only know that this is wrong. They don't know that they are the ones that are being victimized. They are not the one that should be put to blame. So bila example one of the cases is that bila kita interview the child, dia akan banyak kali tukar kenyataan sebab dia takut nak bagi tahu the real exact thing of what happened, because they know that, oh, saya dah bersalah, and they don't want to be truthful. So that is like the start of covering things up, and then like for us not to go deep into the layer tu dia jadi makin susah. And then but then if you speak in the manner of child friendly, or kita macam samakan level with the child, they will eventually open up. So another one of the case that I can share is that there are 3 reports yang ibu kepada kanak-kanak ni buat. This also happened dekat sekolah. The first report, the child bagi tahu, oh, cikgu pegang rambut, usap-usap rambut. But then the mother macam, mana boleh cikgu usap-usap rambut? So okay, the mother make a report to the guru besar first. Lepas tu guru besar tak buat apa-apa, it's like, oh, main-main je. That's the thing, main-main je. And then the second report is when suddenly the child said that, oh, cikgu tu hari ni dukung dia. Lepas tu macam in class, lepas tu dia rasa embarrassed, dia malu, lepas tu macam tak selesa. So the mother make a report to the police. Lepas tu bila dah buat report dengan police say, oh, there is no gangguan sexual to this child. But then the third time, which is actually came to us to our office, which is on the third report, saya interview the child and I said that, okay, slowly talk, biar dia cerita apa-apa, let the child speak what she wants to speak. And then tiba-tiba dia buka cerita, okay, the teacher actually pegang the perut and peha, selah peha. That is like the evidence that we can get from the child. Terus kita buat report police and say, okay, this is another added child, and then the case proceed lah. So basically the first time when kita cakap dengan children tu, memang kita kena expect that, okay, they are traumatized, let them be on their own. Kita make time lah untuk the children. Jangan terus jerkah like say, hey, ini mana boleh, macam benda tu is like very, very no lah when you speak with the child. Okay, that is like the first effect lah on trauma. Second is like Dr. Nazar said just now, is a cycle. Kalau kita tengok dekat sekolah, bagi kes-kes yang report, kita tahu, okay, cikgu ni yang make sexual allegation of sexual abuse to these children. But what about those yang tak di-report? Okay, so if the child of this, okay, katakan macam A is abuser, abuse child B, so when B is going to another school, bila dah besar, and then B is also the victims, tapi they never know that what people did to them is wrong. So they do, bila dah besar, dia buat lagi dekat budak-budak lain. So it's like an endless circle of not knowing what is wrong. So that is like the second, sebab kita ada juga lah case di mana the cikgu is actually another victim of rape victim of the father. So, you know, it's like it's passing down on the next generation. And I think the last one is probably addiction, when they consume like one material and then they might feel some sort of
pleasure.
Hormone yang kita hormon yang diorang sendiri pun tak boleh control kan. So they might consume it more and more, and that is cause addiction to them. That is like the 3 facts yang saya nampak lah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lana. Okay, I think my last question to the panel is that having kita dah discuss ni kan, nanti I buka to the audience. Just one last question. Tak kisahlah Dr. Nazar ke Liana, siapa-siapa nak jawab dulu. Apa yang kita boleh buat to protect our children? I think that's, as a mother, that's my first question. Apa yang kita boleh buat sekarang? And also the another last question is that kalau dah terjadi, sebab kadang-kadang benda ni kita tak boleh nak predict kan, kalau dah terjadi, what can we do? So first, preventive, what can we do to protect them? Tapi let's say dah terjadi, so damage control, sekarang kita kena damage control, what can we do now?
Nak start ke?
Atau kisah siapa-siapa? Liana nak start? Boleh juga.
Boleh juga saya start. Okay, for the saying of prevention is better than cure is always right. Kalau sebab children is an ongoing development that daripada kecil dia akan bawa ke besar lah. So for me, parents or adults should always monitor your children. Bila nak guna phone tu, make limits of how much they can access, and also I think there's an app yang parents can control, but I tak ingat the app. Like if I remember, I Google after that, I can share on the chat box. That is one. Second is on the sexual health education, sexual and reproductive health education to the children, based in accordance with their age. Kiranya macam kita start ajar our children about their own organs, about what should not be touched by other people, and this private part you cannot let other people touch it, see it, even ask about it. So that can be a start also for parents. And I think the last important point is to build trust with your children. Communicate with them, because please don't start please do not make them keep secret from you. Sebab once dia dah macam takut nak be truthful, so that might cause them to like simpan much more secrets of what you as a parent should know.
Yeah. Thank you, Yana. So that means, Dr. Nazar, can you answer the question like, so Yana, prevention. So let's say dah jadi kan. So what can we do as parents, as guardian, as caretakers?
Okay. Jika benda ni dah berlaku, macam Ruby kata control damage kan, pertamanya macam Liana beritahulah, parents tu kena buat report lah kan. So maksudnya kalau the situation tu happen because of the leader of the family, so mak atau kakak dalam keluarga tu perlu membuat report. Okay. Yang keduanya, family, if it happen outside the family, okay, so family perlulah mencari ataupun membawa anak tu untuk berjumpa dengan expert. Kan, so it can be the counsellor kan, dekat sekolah-sekolah ada counsellor ataupun clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, at least to macam orang kata hilangkan perasaan slowly, the feeling of guilt, the feeling of hatred yang ada dalam diri anak tu, kan. So di samping itu, andai kata anak tu diconsider macam membuat sesuatu yang pernah dilarang oleh ibu bapa, contohnya masturbation ke kan, so kita it's not good if we punish the child 100%, maksudnya 100% ni dalam all aspect. So kita kurung anak ke kan, so that is cannot. So kalau dia salah membuat sesuatu perbuatan tu, so perbuatan itulah yang kita kena fokuskan untuk modify perbuatan tu. Kan, contohnya macam anak pernah upload gambar yang tidak baik di dalam YouTube ataupun di dalam Facebook. So kita kena fokus untuk rectify benda tu. Tetapi dalam aspek lain, anak tu perlulah ditreat seperti anak-anak yang lain, kan? Contohnya macam kita kena also develop a kind of the behavior. Kalau dia ada buat behavior yang elok, kita reinforce. Jangan dia hanya menerima punishment 100%, kan? So bila dia nak buat, nak tolong kita kat dapur ke, kita pun kaitkan dengan perbuatan dia. Itulah kau, tak boleh lah, kan? So kalau kita treat dia seperti biasa, tapi perbuatan yang tidak bagus tu kita kena monitor dan kita kena rectify. I think that will later on make the children understand that there are another positive aspect of him or her that still being appreciated by the family, kan?
I like that. I like that so much. Dia more macam targeted punishment, kan?
Kan? So
target satu.
Yeah, it's very difficult lah, kan? Very difficult. I know for the family. Kadang-kadang kita kalau anak buat silap pun kita emo juga, kan, satu hari itu. Apalah lagi kalau perbuatan tu perbuatan yang tidak dapat diterima lah, kan, di minda masyarakat, di minda ibu bapa. Tentu kita ambil masa untuk to make our emotion back to positive. Tak apa, ambil masa. Tapi jangan the whole life of the child tu kita membenci dia, kita menghukum dia. That will be very sad lah later on. Dia akan, itu yang kadang-kadang sampai kepada suicidal ideation, kan, sebab dia cannot bear. Tapi kalau kita sama-sama menganggap bahawa ada kesilapan ibu bapa juga dalam hal itu, kan, mungkin ibu bapa terlalu percayakan orang yang berada di dalam rumah, kan, so kita pun tak menjaga sangat aurat sesama keluarga. So ada bahagian kita dan kita sedar, kita minta ampun pada Allah SWT. So sama-samalah memperbaiki diri, kan. So we cannot put the blame 100% on children, and you yourself as the parents do not make the correction from your side, kan. Okay, I think that's all lah.
Jadi I think memang sangat, for me is a very enlightening discussion. So I'll open the floor to our audience. Siapa-siapa yang nak tanya soalan kepada kita punya panel? Anyone? Saya tengok kat chat. I macam nampak Dr. Ainul macam nak tanya tapi mute. Okay, teruskan.
Assalamualaikum Dr. Nazaria and Liana. Yes, my student. How are you? Okay, I think this is probably more like you know, an addition or a comment that I like to make. Sebab saya rasa perkongsian Dr. Nazaria dengan Sister Liana memang malam ni sangat-sangat berguna lah, ya. Kita sebagai parents and once upon a time kita pun teenagers, kan. Kita kena akui lah memang anak-anak sekarang ni mengalami satu cabaran yang sangat besar. Maybe Dr. Nazaria will agree with me that the challenges that our kids are facing are nothing like we used to face when we were younger, kan, yeah. So I think first and foremost as parents, we have to stop being in denial, you know, trying to run or you know, manage things the way we used to experience, kan, yeah. So probably we need to go down to our children's level. I'm so blessed, alhamdulillah, I have 3 kids, and then, you know, one is already working, one is in the university, and I also have a teenage son. So they have 3 different types of challenges. Perhaps what is important is to provide them, I think most importantly will be pegangan agama lah, ya. Pada saya, I think that is the most important thing lah. We also need to be able to communicate with our children according to their level. Yeah, sometimes we cannot reach them, but we have to find ways how we can, you know, try and get others to also reach them. Yeah, because I think like sometimes they see us as authorities, although we try to be the friendliest parents. Yeah, but they still feel that sometimes they cannot open up to us. So we have to find ways how to get them to speak or to share. Yeah, whatever problems or ideas. it's quite worrying when Liana was sharing with us the statistics just now, kan? Yeah, 1 out of 3 or half of the household are actually internet users, and we have no idea what kind of internet sites that they are visiting. Yeah, so I think the most fundamental thing is to prepare our kids, those things inside them. Yeah, berbalik pada agama lah, I think. All right, Dr. Nazaria will agree with me. I think you have like what, Dr. Nazaria, 5 kids, I think? Yes. Very
Yes,
good.
yes.
So to Liana, I think you're doing a very good job, sharing all this information and making an impact to the younger generation and to the parents as well, yeah, for us to learn. Dr. Ruby has 1 at home and
One
she's
only.
sharing.
One. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ainul, for the sharing. Ada satu soalan dalam chat, so I'm going to read it. Saya Sarah dari Peduli Sahabat Foundation Indonesia. Okay, Sarah, welcome. Salam kenal. Terima kasih Puan Dr. Nazaria dan Puan Nurliana. Bukan Puan lagi, dia Cik. Cik Nurliana for insightful presentation. I'm very speechless when I hear this. Okay, soalan dia satu pada Dr. Nazar. Saya mahu bertanya pada Puan Dr. Nazaria, upaya apa saja yang telah dilakukan oleh Malaysian government to prevent marriage by accident, kalau unwed pregnancy, bukan kiranya outside pregnancy lah, bukan outside, kanak-kanak punya pregnancy pada kanak-kanak. Apakah ada terapi penyembuhan for victims because of child pornography? Jika ada, macam mana terapi itu? Ada tak terapi? So soalannya satu, apa yang government kita buat to prevent these things from happening? I'm not sure lah. Selalunya what the government's doing ni banyaknya after that. Itu yang rumah-rumah pregnancy tu kan, rumah-rumah yang kanak-kanak tu. Before that, I'm not sure. So maybe Liana tahu ke Dr. Nazar tahu. And the second soalan dia, ada tak therapy for children yang dah macam, I guess, addicted to child, to pornography ni?
Okay, mungkin nanti Liana akan jawab berkenaan dengan what the government is doing, Liana. Okay, I will look into the therapy lah. For as far as I know, kan, the therapy is actually very specific to the institution that look after the teenagers yang pregnant out of the wedlock, kan. So it depends to that lah. So there is no single intervention program. So it depends to, contohnya kalau rumah penjagaan A, dia ada cara dia. Rumah penjagaan B, dia ada cara dia. Kalau bawah government, iaitu di bawah Jabatan Kebajikan Masyarakat, dia ada cara dia. So there is no single standard intervention program lah yang digunakan oleh pelbagai institusi yang menolong remaja perempuan ini. Thank you.
Okay, so dia ada third question, tapi tak apa, kita settle yang the second question. Yang apa government ada tak any macam, I think, mechanism to prevent this thing from happening?
For I think yang hamil di luar.
Hamil di luar.
Kan? Alright. So yang what I know, and I think pernah lawat juga, which is Sekolah Tunas Bakti. It is essentially under the Social Welfare Department or JKM. Basically, they place these pregnant children underage, of course, under age of 18. Tetapi kanak-kanak yang dimasukkan di bawah rumah perlindungan JKM ni hanya diterima bila parents themselves yang make a report. And bila make a report ni maksudnya sebagai mangsa. In which there's a stigma lah bila kanak-kanak ni masuk rumah JKM, macam stigma dia, oh ni apa yang budak jahat. This is a very common stigma. And then I think another one is Raudatul Sakinah, which is also a dorm or boarding school for unwed pregnancy children, female. And then this school also they have like a dorm, and then ada sesi rawatan kesihatan berkala. They actually have nurses, doctors coming in, check them periodically, and then they give like advices macam mana kanak-kanak ni, macam mana nak jaga diri semua. And then they also offer education for these teenagers. However, waktu saya buat lawatan ke sana tu, most of them are not very interested lah untuk belajar sebab they actually lost the sense of purpose, you know. Yelah, dia dah rasa macam kenapa nak belajar lagi macam tu. These are very common mindset that the children have, which is very, very saddening lah.
Yeah, which is sad.
To answer the second question yang quite
recovery.
There also one more for not only specific to those yang pregnant luar nikah or bawah umur, but for yang children macam like I mentioned earlier, cases yang di mana kanak-kanak jadi mangsa sexual abuse cases. The social welfare department, bila police make a report, the police akan refer terus kepada JKM apa-apa kes yang melibatkan kanak-kanak. So bila kes dah dalam siasatan, and at the same time JKM akan offer counselling services for these children. They akan counsel the children and also the parents. So that is one of the aspect lah yang
Okay, ada soalan ni lagi. How do you think we as adults can help children not to be digital addicts? I've seen some kids got addicted to gadgets, and when their parents try to take the gadgets, the children got rebellious. So how this is a very real issue sebenarnya. Memang it is hard, especially now. So what do you think, Dr. Nazar? How do we make macam mana nak handle this?
This is very relevant to our current situation, yang mana okay, kalau kanak-kanak sekolah tu memang dia orang akan gunalah gadget ni untuk dia orang punya online class kan. Tapi pada masa yang sama juga kanak-kanak yang tak dapat pergi ke childcare, tak dapat pergi ke tadika dan parents masih perlu membuat kerja di rumah. Biasanya orang kata gadget ni menjadikan satu sumber di mana kita suit the baby, kita tak nak dia ganggu kita buat kerja kan, because we have no choice. Alright, in relation to this question, I think it depends to the age of the children. Okay, the age of the children memainkan peranan lah, di mana dalam rules ataupun dalam orang kata guideline di overseas, kanak-kanak yang di bawah umur 2 tahun should not be exposed to the gadget. Especially if it is more than 1 hour.
Yes.
Kan? So maksudnya 1 hour tu pun kita macam exposekan dia dengan nyanyian Sesame Street ke, ataupun di Malaysia kita boleh ambil program-program yang berkaitan dengan kita punya culture dan value. Okey, yang itu sejam, tidak lebih pada sejam. Okey, tapi pada masa yang sama ianya tidak digalakkan kalau kita menjadikan dia satu requirement untuk kita tidak diganggu oleh anak-anak tu. Di situlah sebenarnya cabaran. Saya faham jugalah di mana kadang-kadang kita baru nak buka komputer, lepas tu anak datang kan, it's very challenging lah untuk kita melakukannya. Tapi macam mana yang saya katakan, kalau kita ada choice, okay, contohnya Sabtu Ahad lah ya Ruby, okay, Sabtu Ahad kita tidak membuat kerja kita, okay, dan di masa tu kita boleh cuba untuk limitkan penggunaan gadget ni kepada anak-anak. So this is where one of the requirement of the good parenting is to set the demand. But the demand that we set must be developmentally appropriate. Okay, contohnya, okay, kalau budak-budak 3 ke 5 tahun, okay, so di sini budak 3 ke 5 tahun ni dia rasa kalau parents dia boleh buat aktiviti dengan dia, dia suka. So kita boleh bagi duration yang sikit lah untuk dia menggunakan gadget ni kan. So pada permulaannya dia akan menjerit, macam Puan ni kata tadi, dia akan menjerit, dia akan jadi marah, tantrum kan. Tapi kita kena make sure waktu kita nak tak bagikan gadget tu, the environment sekarang tu selamat. So kalau dia nak menjerit ke mengguling, silakanlah. Kan. So nanti mungkin dalam masa yang sejam, tak sampai sejam lah, bila kita dengar the sound of cry tu, tone dia dah berbeza, so kita datang dan kita appreciate dia, kita pujuk dia dengan cara yang betul. Tapi kita suami isteri kena very straight lah in terms of the control dan demand monitoring of the usage tu lah. Itu kalau kita ada masa lah kan. Tapi kalau macam kita buat kerja pada masa yang sama, kita bagi dia gadget, lepas tu kita menjerit, dia pun menjerit, sudah tak jadi hal lah kan. Tapi kalau kanak-kanak tu dah boleh negotiate dengan kita, kan. Contohnya kalau anak tu dah darjah 5 ke 6, kita cakap betul-betul, okay. So spending time with the gadget too much is not good lah kan. So kita mungkin sama-sama buat jadual kan, tapi monitoring itulah yang mencabarnya. Budak-budak dah umur 9-10 tahun, dia boleh terima kita punya pendapat, kita negotiate on the demand and control. Tapi kadang-kadang nak monitor tu kan, contohnya macam anak saya dah susun, lepas tu kadang-kadang kita tak monitor. Biasalah kalau kita tak monitor, dia larilah daripada guideline yang kita berikan kan. So di situlah sebenarnya kita boleh merubah behavior tu kepada the behavior yang lebih bagus, iaitu tidak depending untuk gadget. Cuma ibu bapa perlu mempunyai kemahiran bagaimana untuk mengalihkan daripada tingkah laku kurang baik kepada tingkah laku yang baik. Kan?
Okay, Liana ada soalan, macam dah angkat tangan.
Yes, I macam nak tulis tu macam susah sikit. Okay, a recent video, ada TikTok video ni lah. Ada teacher ni, dia married to student dia tau. And beza umur 25 years. Lepas tu mula-mula macam tak perasan, ingatkan macam dah long time baru dia orang jumpa and macam suka each other and get married. But rupanya tahun 2018 dia orang dah kenal as teacher student relationship. Lepas tu bila dah yang the student dah 18, they decide to get married to the teacher. So is this considered as child grooming? Like, sebab memang daripada waktu dia sekolah lagi memang teacher tu dah macam mesra dengan dia. And some people actually said, tapi kan dah jodoh, that's our society.
Liana, would you like to take that?
Yes. For me, it's very straightforward. Grooming happen bila kanak-kanak tu bawah umur, and kanak-kanak kita labelkan as those under the age of 18, which is bila dia dah sampai 18 birthday, dia dah bukan kanak-kanak lah. So if the interest start since dia sekolah, then the answer is obvious lah.
Okay, that's just grooming. Okay, ada one more question here from Amir Zulkifli. I'll read that question first. Hi, I'm Amir and a school teacher. I have a question. What's your opinion on sex or sexuality education in school? Would it help to curb this issue in Malaysia? Appreciate views from Dr. Nazariah and Miss Liana. So, any one of you want? Maybe kita divide sikit-sikit. Dr. Nazar sikit.
Okay, thank you, Brother Amir. Okay, actually, it starts as early as the time where the child can understand the part of the body, kan? So maksudnya dia dah tahu dah bahagian-bahagian tubuh badan yang mana dia ada tubuh badan tu, orang lain pun ada tubuh badan tu. Yang mananya dia adalah seawal 3 tahun lah, kan. So kalau kita tengok pun dekat kindergarten, dekat preschool, dia ada gambar tubuh badan kan. So kita boleh tunjukkan tubuh badan itu kan. Tapi bila dia dah 4 tahun, kita pun faham, okay, fahamkan dia bahawa tubuh badan ni adalah tubuh badan yang orang lain tak boleh sentuh kan. That is actually the initial stage of introducing the sex education. Alright, cuma sex education dekat Malaysia ni tidak relevan lah ya kalau kita nak ajar cara intercourse ke, cara benda-benda yang yang lebih kepada tidak ke arah memahami apa kesannya kalau seks berlaku kan. So kita lebih kepada membina pengetahuan kanak-kanak dan juga membina bagaimana kanak-kanak ataupun remaja boleh pelihara dignity diorang. Itu lebih ke arah sex education dah. Tapi bagi saya, ianya bermula seawal yang mungkin apabila kanak-kanak sudah ada memahami konsep tubuh badan, tapi ianya mestilah relevan dengan developmental aspect of the kanak-kanak.
Diana, you want to add to that? Do you think sex education tu relevant would help curb this issue kalau ada kat sekolah?
For me, yes, personally, I would think it would. Sebab in a perspective of someone yang advocate for children's right, every children has the right to know their body parts. And this includes also their own organs of reproductive organs, the private parts. And then if they are not properly explained or taught on, bahagian ni untuk bersihkan badan kita macam mana, and then if puberty comes, what do you do, how to clean yourself, those are also actually included in sexual health education. It's not just a matter of sexual activities, how to wear condoms, it's not just that. The children also, bila dah kecil-kecil kita ajar dia, okay, even as young as 3 years old, patut ajar mereka that no one should touch your private parts and whatnot. And I think dekat Google boleh cari they already have like a table macam 3 to 6 tahun apa yang nak ajar kat budak. 6 to 12 tahun nak ajar apa. It's a very simple macam graph lah they created. Yeah. And also to add, because actually I attended a workshop related to sexual health education, reproductive education. Nama dia panjang. Usually kita concern on the normal children kan, bila dia datang bulan and whatnot. But for those disabled children, OKU children, they also experience datang bulan, the wet dreams. But these children, they do not know how to actually control that. So that is another thing that I think our community should alert also lah. So that's why I think it's very important to have sex ed in school. It's not just limited to sexual activities and those things.
Okay, so Daniel ada question. Yes, Daniel. One last question.
Assalamualaikum. Okay, I have a question. My name is Daniel. Hi, Dr. Nazaria. I was your student back then. And hi, Miss Liana. Okay, so I have a question about pornography and children. We know that when children are exposed to pornography, especially for a period of time, they tend to be addicted. Yeah, and there are studies that mention pornography can actually lead to addiction. So let's say if the children is addicted or is exposed to pornography, and then it is caught by the parents, let's say, and then the parents has made a confrontation. But since they are, let's say, exposed from an early age, they tend to be addicted. So they will tend to still continue that practice, let's say, and they know how to actually escape from how being caught by the parents, right? So my question is, what are the symptoms or what are the signs that we can see that our children have like a severe addiction to pornography? To an extent that we need to seek for like psychological help, or even, it's not up until the parents, they need to seek for professional help. So that's my question, because, right now it's very easy for them to see these things, right? Especially with even with TikTok and everything, there are some things that are soft porn, in which it's not a porn, but the way on how the move and everything, it is. We see that this is not appropriate. So that's my question for both Dr. Naza and also Miss Liana. Yep.
Thank you, Daniel. So Liana nak start ke Dr. Nazar?
Saya boleh start sikit.
Okay.
For the signs, for me ada one case lah yang pretty apparent the sign. Bila the child is too addicted to pornography, the parents realize that dia sakit-sakit perut, they start diarrhea for a few days, and then when they want to check up, the child actually masturbate sebab they watch all this pornographic content. So bila the parents reflect back of what the child did, the pattern happen bila the parents start bagi gadget because of MCO kan. So the parents bagi gadget, setiap malam je the child dia macam akan tidur awal, macam masuk bilik awal and tidur, switch off lampu, around 9 o'clock terus tidur. And then that part is what believed by the parents is the start of it lah. It's like slowly start. And I also believe that for children, the physical signs is also apparent. So mereka kanak-kanak kan, so dia punya sign are much more obvious.
Thank you, Len. Dr. Nazar?
Okay, there is no what you call that a standard condition yang menunjukkan bahawa macam okay, now dah sampailah masanya, okay, kita bawa kanak-kanak tu atau anak tu jumpa psychiatrist ataupun jumpa kaunselor kan. Tetapi kalau misalnya ibu bapa tu dia memang close, dia memang really understand the routine of the anak-anak, macam Liana cakap tadi, kenapa pula tiba-tiba ni tidur awal kan? So biasanya kalau kita tengok kepada faktor rumah, biasanya mereka akan start mengantuk tu pukul 10, pukul 11 kan, tapi pukul 8 dah ni kan. So di situlah di mana ibu bapa mungkin boleh mengambil langkah untuk mengintip lah. Kan kalau kita tengok kalau kita tengok rutin anak ni dah macam kenapa pula tiba-tiba dulu boleh berbual-bual di ruang tamu bersama, tiba-tiba menyendiri kan. So we need to be Detective Conan lah kot kan. So kita kena jadi Detective Conan, macam mana ya, so kita macam intip dia ke kan. So kebijaksanaan ibu bapa lah macam mana sebenarnya nak melihat keadaan macam tu. Sebab dalam perspektif psikologi bila keadaan sosial tu is not as usual, dia indicate something. Bila physiological aspect, contohnya kalau makan tu bersama-sama tu satu pinggan ke kan, 2 pinggan cukup, ini macam makan dah pergi kan. So that will indicate something lah kan. So kita dah mulalah boleh menjadi Detective Conan. But then di situlah macam many parents jugalah kadang-kadang we are not being informed kat mana kita nak mencari bantuan kan. So kadang-kadang kita boleh je cari bantuan, kita cakap dengan expert tu, this what happened to my children, can you come and interview my kids contohnya kan. So this is where we go to the relevant agency lah, nak promote lah kan. Di psikologi department kita ada psychology service unit. Okay, saya rasa Sister Miza ada di sini. Sister Miza jaga sekarang ni PSU dia open to the public lah, those who have the problem and they required some kind of the psychological intervention, they can register to PSU lah. So tapi itulah Ruby, kita ni open during third semester sajalah sebab kita ada budak master clinical and counselling yang buat practicum kan. So that will be very cheap lah, kita charge very cheap lah for them, but it's good the exposure. Kalau lah misalnya kita punya supervisor of that practicum student to see this case is serious, so parents will be informed about that. So this is where either they go for the clinical psychologist after that practicum session, ataupun dia akan di-forwardkan ke tempat yang lebih bersesuaian lah.
So cara ni juga kita nak jemput the public lah to engage with to engage dengan UIA kan.
So jangan rasa malu.
Tak ada rasa
apa,
malu,
because they protect the privacy, very confidential kan.
Okay, so I can only take the last question here. Thank you for very informative sharing tonight. Okay, I have a quick question pertaining to the situation that Miss Liana shared just now about the teacher that touched peha and perut of the child. It's fortunate how attentive the mother of the child took action. What is your opinion about those children that told their parents about the alleged assault, but due to the lack of education pertaining body parts and sex health in older generation, okay, they disregard the matter since it's not that serious in their opinion. Okay, that's very common. Okay, how do they be educated in this issue so that it seems more critical, and is there any action taken by any organization? So now it's not about educating the child, it's educating the parents too.
Maksudnya on this for parents, more on the awareness lah should be, because even for our office we do have some sort of awareness program to the parents, to teachers, but for sexual education so far I don't think we have one, but in planning. But the awareness I think sebab bila dah jadi parents and benda tu dah jadi kan, probably we can look into those who are about to be parents. This is like my personal suggestion lah. Probably in the kursus kahwin, we include some sort of parenting skill for them before they got married. Not just the amanah tanggungjawab as husband and wife, but also how to build a good family, and also macam mana nak jaga anak-anak as they are the ones that amanah that should be really proper taken care of. So perhaps that can be a start. Yeah. Okay, I see from the chat. Thank you, Lena. I see from the chat there's a lot of questions on sexual what do you call tadi yang panjang, sexual reproductive health education tu kan. I think we might not have time to address this, but perhaps Liana, if you know anyone yang I can invite to give a talk on that, about sexual reproductive health education, which I think is important. So kita tak sempat nak cover semua ni. This is, but I have to admit this is important, kan? The sexuality education. Perhaps so Wardah yang bertanya. So inshallah in future we will have that one webinar on children and sexual education. That would be very, very useful. Okay, so I think because kita dah terlebih banyak sangat masa.
Ruby, izinkan saya respon pada soalan yang berkaitan dengan seks education ni lah. Okay, dia macam ni. Ada satu kajian yang menunjukkan bahawa authoritative parenting style ni dia akan menjamin kepada perkembangan positif kanak-kanak. Kan, so maksudnya dia ada demand yang tinggi, monitoring yang bagus, kasih sayang yang tinggi, communication yang efektif. So kajian memang nampak possibility kanak-kanak atau remaja daripada ibu bapa yang mengamalkan parenting ni tidak akan terjerumus kepada seks di luar nikah. Okay. But what happened, okay, in one study in Malaysia, they interview those teenager yang pregnant, okay, di usia muda, mendapati bahawa ibu bapa mereka mengamalkan authoritative parenting style. But what missing is the parents do not talk about sex with the children. Seks kat sini maksudnya macam mana nak mengawal nafsu, mengapa nafsu tu muncul, tidak dikongsi bersama anak. So what happened is that keinginan nak tahu apa yang I patut buat, itu didapati daripada kawan-kawan. So kawan-kawan ni biasalah kan, dia akan ajar benda-benda yang dia sendiri pun sebenarnya tak tahu bagus ke tidak. So di situlah bagi saya boleh start dengan ibu bapa lah. Kita kongsi, kalau anak lelaki mungkin ayahnya lah patut bercerita sebab ayah pun dah melalui usia remaja kan, awal dewasa macam tu. So ibu bapa, so ibu boleh bercakap dengan anak perempuan. Biasanya biarlah mereka mendapat pengetahuan yang awal tentang seks, nafsu, bagaimana dianya datang dalam diri kita kan. Sebab kadang-kadang remaja ni dia akan rasa macam something not right lah, kenapa I tertarik kepada orang lelaki. So kita akan kata that is normal. So however, you have to do this, you have to do that. What do you think? So bila dia berkongsi tu, dia akan kita dah banner dah pre-existing idea about this one kan. So di situlah peranan ibu bapa tu penting lah. Ia bermula dari rumah.
Betul, betul. Saya setuju sangat dengan Dr. Nazaria. Saya tak bolehlah cakap banyak pasal parenting. Saya seorang je anak. Tak boleh compare dengan orang. Tak boleh compare orang ramai anak. Saya seorang je. Tapi I would agree that open communication tu very, very important lah. So they don't feel, they tu tak apply lah to me. She doesn't feel macam she cannot speak to me on anything. Okay, I think we have to stop here. I hope all the audience enjoy the program. Kalau tengok dalam chat, my student ada letak something, my student ada letak feedback form. So if you have time, perhaps you can fill that form. Just inform us what we can do to improve, because inshallah in future we will have more webinars like this. Not necessarily on bahasa je. Bahasa pun inshallah we have, but we will have anything related to children. We'll try to get parents juga lah, things about parenting as well. Yeah. So just one last thing before we end our session, fotografi. Itu evidence. Evidence kita buat kerja di malam ini. Malam Jumaat, kiranya apa orang kata TGIF kita kan, thank God it's Friday, kita buat ni. Alright, so if you can turn on your cameras, I'll just smile and I'll just screenshot. Okay? Okay, alright. Mana screenshot? Okay, just smile everyone. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Dah siap? Dah bersedia senyum? 1, 2, 3. Okay, lagi satu galeri. 1, 2, 3. Okay, kejap. Okay, I think everything's good. Jadi terima kasih banyak for joining our discussion. I truly enjoy. Thank you so much, Dr. Nazaria. Thank you so much, Liana.
No
I
problem.
hope, yes, I hope we can invite you, inshallah, in future for similar topics and all that. And I hope the audience also gain banyak faedah from our discussion. Just to promote, kita ada another webinar on Monday on public health. So saya dah jemput Dr. Farhan Rusli, dia akan cakap pasal sekolah dan pembukaan sekolah, dan from the public health perspective, sebab saya rasa macam sekarang ni I think tak banyak about, kalau if you tengok kat TV, they talk about educational perspective. So I want to know about the science itself. Is it safe to open school? Alright, so yeah, please join us on Monday. Inshallah, Monday 8 to 9. You can ask Dr. Farhan questions too, because yeah, apparently he's the person you ask about scientific things regarding pandemic. Right? Okay, so thank you so much. So inshallah, we'll see each other soon. All right, Assalamualaikum.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ruby. Thank you all. Assalamualaikum.